Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unlocking C++, where we will be learning how to program in C++ from the ground up. By the end of this video series, you will be able to understand all of the basics that you need to know in order to write programming using the C++ programming language. Um, I will be assuming uh, that you are familiar with computers a little bit, that you know how to install or run programs, all the basic things like that, like most people know how to do. I will not, however, be assuming any familiarity with programming itself or programming concepts, so we'll be explaining all of those as we go. Um, and at the very end of this series, the last few videos, I will be walking you through step by step how to write a Sudoku program on your computer that you can show off to all your friends and say, like, hey, look at this cool thing I made. And after that, where you go is up to you. So we're going to start by talking about what C++ is and what a program is. A program is essentially just a list of instructions for the computer to follow. The computer looks at these instructions and executes them in order, and it does exactly what those instructions tell them to do. So if it does something funky, then it's because you told it to do that, and all the fun stuff that goes with that. C++ is a language that programmers can use to write programs. And we'll see a little bit of what that looks like by the end of the video. It's an extension of the C programming languages, or C programming language, and that just adds more features to it. It's a high-level programming language, and what that means is that it abstracts a little bit away from the hardware so that you don't have to worry about what's going on under the hood if you don't want to. But if you do want to or need to worry about all of that stuff, the C++ programming language offers access to it, things like access to system memory, access to peripheral devices. All of that stuff is there if you need it. And for that reason, it's very useful for high performance applications, things where you need a lot of code to execute very quickly. For example, in game engines, the Unreal game engine, actually, that you're probably familiar with, is programmed almost exclusively in C++. So why should you bother learning C++ anyway? If you've talked to programmers, you've probably heard things like, well, C++ is really hard, it's confusing, it's got a lot of features that you really aren't going to end up needing. But it's for those reasons that I think it's really valuable to learn anyway. Because it's difficult to learn, if you can learn C++, then you can learn just about any other programming language out there. In fact, it's the first programming language that I learned, and I found it a very useful experience. Um, and partially because of what I talked about before, because it's very fast and it offers low level access to hardware. It's a very useful language to learn for that reason, because if you want to work on a project that needs those things, C++ already has it. So you have those tools under your belt instead of having to go out and learn them all over again. So to get started in what we're going to do today, um, let's go into Visual Studio, Microsoft Visual Studio, which is what we're going to be using to write C++ programs in. Microsoft Visual Studio is a developer environment that includes all of the tools that you need to program in this language and other languages too, if you install the packages that support those. But we're just going to be worrying about the C++ stuff. I'm not going to be going over how to install this and get it up and running on your computer, because that will depend on your operating system and other things. It's going to be different depending on your particular computer. There's lots of resources that you can find out on the internet as far as how to install that. But once you have it installed and get up to this point, then we're going to click on Create New Project, and we're going to do Empty Project. And I'm going to call this project Hello World, because that's the program that we're going to be making today. And in this, now we have a completely empty project. It has nothing in it. It won't do anything if we try to run it. So to fix that, we're going to go over to here. We're going to right click and we're going to go to add new item. And we're going to add a CPP source file, and I'm going to call that file main.cpp and click add. Now we're going to see it pop over here. And this is the point where we can actually start writing code and writing a program. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, a program is basically just a sequence of instructions that the computer is going to follow. Now, the goal for this program is we want to write a program that displays some kind of a message to the user. And typically that message for your first program will just be hello world, like a little cute example of, hey, this program is working. It doesn't really do anything useful, but once we do that, then we can jump out into the more complicated things and get actual useful programs running. So every C++ program needs these lines of code in it at the very minimum. We're going to say int main, then a set of parentheses, then open and close brackets, and return 0, semicolon. This set of instructions, we'll go over a little bit more in detail what this is all about in some future videos, but basically what's going on here is we have a function that is called main that returns a variable of an integer type to the operating system. This main function is the entry point of our program. So anything right here, that's the code that's going to get executed when our program launches. So if we go, in order to run this, it's not going to do anything, but I'll just show you what it does. We go to local Windows debugger, and yep, we can see that the program ran. It executed with code 0, which means that it executed successfully. So that's all working just fine. If you click run and it just pops up and closes without staying up like this, then you can go to Tools, Options, should be under Debugging, there it is. There should be some way. Yeah, automatically close the console when debugging stops. You'll want to make sure that that's unchecked. And that will give you that behavior where when the program stops executing, then it just stays up here like this. And that'll be important for what we're about to do next. Okay, so to get this program to actually do something, we're going to have to do a couple of things first. So we're going to put some code up here above the main function. I'll just give us a few empty lines for that. We're going to want to add something called a preprocessor directive. And what that is it's basically just something that tells our program, hey, there's some code that somebody else wrote somewhere, and we want to include that code in our program. And the way we do that is pretty simple. We just say pound include, and then after the include, we just say whatever it is that we want to include here. And in this case, we want to include a file called iostream. And iostream is a part of something called the standard library. The standard library is included with almost all C++ compilers. And it just gives access to basic input-output functions, things like writing to the console, getting input from the user, other useful things like that. So I usually include it in all of my programs because it's useful for debugging. It's useful for writing simple console programs, all sorts of stuff like that. The next thing we're going to want to do is to use the IOStream library to write a message into the console. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to say std : cout, and then we're going to use these little carets here, and then we're going to put the message hello world standard ENDL, which stands for end line. And if we click run here, then we can see it gave us our hello world message right there. So that's all working just fine. And you can change this message to whatever you want. Like we can say blah, 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 something silly like that. And yep, it just gives us right back what we gave it. Let's go ahead and change it back to what we had. Okay, so that's our first program written, up and running. Couple of things that I'll just quickly mention here before we go here. We see this little section here. That stands for standard. That means that we're using something from the standard namespace. And a lot of programmers will disagree with me on this. They'll say it's bad practice or whatever. But something that I usually like to do in all of my programs is just up here right after we include the IOStream library, we can say using namespace std semicolon. And then we don't have to do that. We can just say cout. And we can just say end line instead of having to write that std : before every time we use anything like that. And the reason I like to do that is because it just saves a little bit of typing. Because if we have like 100 or so things that we want to print out to the console, it's a little bit of a hassle to write that std : every time we want to do that. Couple other things to note. You'll notice that some of these lines have a semicolon at the end. That's very important. At the end of each instruction line, the compiler will expect a semicolon at the end of it, just to let it know that, hey, that's the end of the line, because C++ actually ignores white space. And what that means is I can actually just put all of this into one line. And it'll run just fine. Just the same as it did before. Of course, it's not usually good practice to do that because it's very difficult to read any code that's been written like that. And the whole goal of a computer programming language like this is to make code that both humans and computers can understand so that it provides an interface for us to communicate with them. But yeah, that's all the basics that we'll go over today. In the next video, we'll start going over variables and data types and how to use those in our programs and what that means. But for now, have a good day and happy coding.